So Queen Camilla just had her power to make decisions officially frozen. And the way it happened is honestly more interesting than the headline suggests, because when you actually look at the sequence of events, this was not some slow-building palace drama that played out over months. This was a carefully planned 9-hour operation that started with a judge opening a sealed safe and ended with the Queen Consort's car sitting outside a divorce law firm in Mayfair. And that last detail, the law firm's stop, is where the whole thing gets really interesting. But we will get there because the timeline of how this unfolded matters. Before we dive in, if you want more royal deep dives like this one, hit subscribe to Royal Daily Report real quick. It helps the channel and keeps you in the loop on stuff the mainstream outlets tend to gloss over. So Queen Camilla showed up to this morning, thinking she had automatic access to one of the most valuable pieces in the royal collection, the Vladimir tiara, which carries a documented insurance value of just under $15 million. Her team had already been coordinating with the director of the royal collection, getting it prepared for upcoming state functions. They were operating under what seemed like a reasonable assumption that the Queen Consort has automatic right to request items from the vault. That is how it has always worked, right? The title comes with access. Except at exactly 8:15 this morning at the Royal Courts of Justice, Sir Andrew McFarland, who serves as president of the Family Division, executed a legal protocol that almost never gets used. He formally opened the seal on a secured judicial safe that holds exactly 33 sealed royal wills, documents that normally sit under a strict 90-year period of secrecy, specifically designed to protect the institution from exactly this kind of internal conflict. Opening one prematurely requires proof that there is a dispute threatening institutional integrity and public trust. And apparently the fight over the Vladimir tiara qualified. When that will was opened, the late Queen Elizabeth II had included a specific binding clause that completely ended Queen Camilla's assumption. The legal text dictates that management, control, and use of the Vladimir tiara are legally entrusted exclusively to Catherine, Princess of Wales, and it explicitly cancels any other claims made by the current administration. That is not unclear language. That is not open to interpretation. And that is the late Queen saying this asset goes to Catherine, period, and no later title overrides that designation. The proceedings in the briefing room were apparently swift and uncompromising. A source who was present described the exact exchange, and it is worth walking through because it shows how quickly the legal framework shifted. When the mandate was presented, the legal representative for the Princess of Wales did not negotiate or soften the language, or offer some compromise where Queen Camilla could borrow the tiara with permission. The council stated directly that the written directive of the late sovereign is legally binding, and the asset remains strictly under the jurisdiction she designated. Representatives for Queen Camilla tried pushing back by citing standard royal protocols, arguing that Her Majesty requires unimpeded access to the primary collection to fulfill her official and diplomatic duties on the global stage. And honestly, on paper, that is not an unreasonable argument. The Queen Consort does have official functions where wearing significant heritage pieces carries symbolic weight, but the presiding authority immediately rejected it. And this is the line that matters. They stated that the Royal Collection Trust is governed by the explicit legal instructions of the monarch, who acquired or managed the asset, and that legal boundary overrides current titles and cannot be bypassed. That ruling is the foundation everything else was built on today. It triggered the immediate drafting and activation of an internal order designated RC0805, which is not a standard palace guideline or some strongly worded memo. It is a hardline operational freeze that establishes a strict verification protocol for any high-value asset withdrawal. Because the High Court verified the legal ownership and management rights, Queen Camilla no longer holds the power to bypass the trust's approval process. Every single request she makes regarding significant heritage items now has to go through a compliance review, which effectively removes the special power traditionally associated with her position. By 10:45 this morning, the Privy Council had officially ratified the court's findings and distributed the updated protocol to all senior staff. But here is where the timeline gets more intense. Because a sealed will, no matter how legally binding it is still just a piece of paper. On its own, it is rarely enough to immediately dismantle the operational power of a sitting queen consort. To enforce a mandate of that magnitude against the current administration, you need someone willing to apply pressure. And that someone was Princess Anne. At exactly 10:45, the conflict moved from the courtroom into a highly restricted briefing room inside St. James's Palace, Room K, which is a 42 square meter space, deliberately chosen because it is routinely swept and contains no digital audio recording equipment. Whatever happened in there was never meant to leak, but the implications were apparently too massive to contain. The emergency meeting of the Privy Council lasted exactly 48 minutes, and according to insiders, Princess Anne did not enter that room to mediate a family dispute or smooth things over. She arrived to execute a firm stance on following the Constitution. She walked to the center of the table, placed a classified dossier alongside a secure digital drive, and that drive reportedly contained an unreleased, highly sensitive audio recording captured during the late Queen's final days at Balmoral. Then looking directly at the council members and the representatives of the king, and delivered an ultimatum. Her statement, as verified by sources, was essentially that either the manipulators operating within the administration get cleared out, or she takes the recording directly to the House of Commons. To understand the sheer force of that threat, you have to understand what taking evidence to the House of Commons actually triggers. Princess Anne was not threatening to make an embarrassing speech or generate bad headlines. She was preparing to utilize parliamentary privilege, which would make internal overreach an immediate matter of public record. Here is how that mechanism works. If evidence of senior staff manipulating royal assets gets presented to Parliament, it instantly forces a government inquiry into the sovereign grant, which is the taxpayer funding that sustains the monarchy's operations. That kind of inquiry inevitably leads to a brutal public vote of no confidence regarding the palace's internal financial management. It is a nightmare scenario that puts the funding of the entire institution in jeopardy. And faced with that immediate threat, the monarch's representatives were completely cornered. To save the credibility of the crown and protect the sovereign grant, they had to concede to Anne's demands. The consequence was absolute. Before the meeting concluded, a summary dismissal order was officially drafted and authorized. What is notable is that the order did not penalize Queen Camilla directly, which would have been constitutionally complex and probably would have created a different kind of crisis. Instead, it targeted the exact infrastructure that gave her power. The mandate authorized the immediate termination and removal of her core senior aides, the specific staff members who had facilitated the bypassing of standard protocols. In one motion, the administrative protection surrounding Queen Camilla was entirely stripped away. Without her hand-picked advisors and communication directors to execute her orders, her ability to exert influence over palace logistics essentially vanished. So that is the legal foundation and the enforcement mechanism. But the most calculated strike of the day had nothing to do with diamonds or tiaras. To truly neutralize a competing administration within the palace walls, you do not just secure the vault. You dismantle the machine that amplifies their voice. And the ultimate target was the coordinated media and public relations network operating behind Queen Camilla. At precisely 12:30 this afternoon, the reality of the Privy Council's decision arrived at the gates of Clarence House. Inside the Queen Consort's private office, the atmosphere was reportedly business as usual. 4 senior aides, including her primary private secretary and top communication strategist, were taking a brief pause, reportedly having a midday cup of Earl Grey tea, completely unaware that a summary dismissal mandate had been authorized just an hour prior. That quiet routine ended the moment the doors opened without warning. A detail of royal protection officers entered the executive suite, and this was not a standard human resources meeting or a conversation about restructuring. It was an immediate institutional removal. Before any of the staff could return to their workstations or send a single warning email, the palace computer department executed a total computer shutdown for their accounts. Their Level 4 security clearances, which granted them access to highly sensitive royal schedules and internal correspondence, were digitally removed across the entire system. The protocol for this level of internal dismissal is swift, silent, and rigid. The aides were explicitly instructed to step away from their desks immediately and were strictly forbidden from retrieving their palace-issued laptops, secure tablets, or any physical files. This immediate separation is a standard security measure designed to prevent the downloading of sensitive communications or the deletion of digital footprints. Under the close watch of security personnel, these 4 individuals, who had wielded immense influence just that morning, were escorted down the corridors and out of the Clarence House gates. The entire operation took exactly 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes resulted in the total collapse of a deeply entrenched public relations apparatus. For months, this specific group of advisors had acted as the unseen architects of Queen Camilla's public story. They were the strategists carefully cultivating relationships with global media outlets, managing optics, and subtly steering favorable coverage, particularly across influential American press. They were the shield and the megaphone for her administration. And with their sudden removal, that critical pipeline of information was severed without warning. There is no longer a dedicated team waiting to brief sympathetic journalists, manage narrative spin, or defend against the inevitable fallout of the morning's judicial rulings. Queen Camilla was abruptly and thoroughly isolated from her own communication network. It is a profound level of administrative containment. And without her key strategists to navigate the complex media landscape, she has been left entirely exposed, facing a rapidly shifting palace dynamic with no mechanism to respond. Now, while Queen Camilla's communication network was being systematically taken apart across town, you might wonder how the Princess of Wales responded to the escalating crisis. In the modern monarchy, a swift press release is usually the standard playbook. But absolute silence at a high-stakes institutional standoff is often the most powerful strategy of all. At exactly 2:45 in the afternoon, the center of gravity shifted to the white drawing room inside Buckingham Palace. The setting itself is significant because it is traditionally used for formal audiences and official state business. And Catherine walked into the room dressed in a sharp, dark navy Alexander McQueen coat dress. According to sources within the household, the atmosphere was incredibly clinical. There were no cameras, no official palace photographers, and notably no smiles exchanged with the attending officials. She did not issue a statement of victory or hold a briefing. She simply walked straight to the antique desk, picked up a standard-issue Parker fountain pen, and signed her name at the bottom of a single highly classified document designated form for ARCT. To the untrained eye, it might look like standard palace paperwork, but within the rigid hierarchy of the monarchy, that signature was a definitive administrative checkmate. Here is exactly how this specific mechanism works, and why it changes everything. First, by legally executing Form 4 ARCT, Catherine officially activated her designation as the co-president of the Royal Heritage Trust. This is not a symbolic or honorary title handed out for good public relations. It is a strictly executive position, with sweeping legally binding oversight over the institution's most valuable historical assets. Second, this activation instantly transferred the master digital security protocols of the Royal Jewel Vault directly to her private office. The physical steel doors of the vault might be guarded by royal protection officers, but the authorization to actually open those doors and remove an item now requires her direct digital clearance. Third, and most importantly, This signature establishes a permanent, unavoidable administrative consequence. From the exact moment the ink dried on that paper, a new airtight protocol was set in stone. Moving forward, if Queen Camilla wishes to request any heritage piece, whether it is a tiara, a necklace, or a historic brooch with an insurance value exceeding $100,000, the request can no longer be processed directly through the vault manager. It must be formally submitted to the trust, landing directly on Catherine's desk. As the new executive overseer, the Princess of Wales now holds absolute veto power over these requests. She can review the application and simply return it with a denied status under the current legal framework established by the unsealed will and the Privy Council. She is not required to provide a single word of explanation or justification to Queen Camilla or to anyone else. There were no public arguments, no dramatic confrontations in the hallways, and absolutely no room for debate. With a single signature in a quiet room, the ultimate keys to the Windsor vault definitively changed hands. The Princess of Wales did not need to raise her voice or leak a story to the press to assert her position. She utilized the exact legal and administrative framework of the institution to secure her authority, effectively locking the doors from the inside. So now we have a queen consort without her chosen crown, without her trusted group of helpers, and abruptly stripped of her institutional voice. And the question becomes what the final stage of this sudden isolation actually looks like. At exactly 5 p.m, the heavy iron gates of Buckingham Palace facing the Mall slowly opened. London was blanketed in a steady grey drizzle, setting a stark, muted backdrop for an exit that no one in the press was positioned to capture. A single black Bentley, accompanied by a minimal security detail, pulled out of the palace grounds and merged into typical city traffic. There were no flashing lights, no police sirens clearing the route, and absolutely no royal fanfare. The departure was completely silent, almost entirely unnoticed by the public. Simultaneously, the Royal Press Corps received a highly unusual one-line email from the Central Communications Office. It read simply that the Queen Consort requires an extended period of rest at her private residence, Ray Mill House. In the carefully orchestrated world of the monarchy, this is not a vacation or a routine retreat. It is what insiders refer to as a soft exile. The institution does not need to issue a public demotion or engage in a messy media war to strip away a senior royal's operational influence. They simply remove the platform by framing the departure as a need for extended rest. The palace avoids a public constitutional crisis while achieving its primary objective: immediate physical and administrative distance. Ray Mill House is her private property in Wiltshire, located far from the center of government, and more importantly, it is entirely separate from the official royal network. It does not possess the secure infrastructure, the classified communication lines, or the executive staff required to command palace operations. By relocating her there, the system has effectively unplugged her from the institutional mainframe. In practical terms, a queen consort derives her power from proximity to the sovereign and active participation in the daily machinery of the state. When you remove the daily briefings, restrict the access to internal documents, and dismantle her ability to summon senior officials, the title becomes purely for show. This is the reality of isolated shutdown within the firm. It is a precise administrative maneuver designed to quietly shut down a competing center of power. From standing at the absolute peak of international prestige just days prior, Queen Camilla now finds herself politically depleted, left with a prestigious title, but absolutely no mechanism to use it. For someone who spent decades navigating intense public scrutiny and complex palace dynamics to reach the pinnacle of the royal hierarchy, the sudden removal is the ultimate consequence. The true disaster for someone whose position relies entirely on visibility and influence is not a dramatic public confrontation or a formal stripping of rank. Those actions create noise, and the monarchy survives by controlling the noise. The most devastating consequence is the absolute deafening silence of the system that has suddenly decided to move forward without you. It is the chilling realization that the scheduling offices, the Heritage Trust, and the Global Communication Network are now functioning seamlessly under new direction. As the motorcade disappeared into the evening rain, it left behind a profoundly altered palace. Queen Camilla departed the capital, not as a reigning partner in power, but as an isolated figure, effectively locked out of the operational heart of the Windsor dynasty. Subscribe to Royal Daily Report for breaking palace coverage and exclusive analysis. But if you assume the dust has settled and the institutional hierarchy is now firmly secured, you might be deeply underestimating the situation. It is easy to look at the silent departure from Buckingham Palace and see a definitive conclusion. But ask yourself whether you really believe that someone who spent 3 meticulously calculated decades navigating public obstacles and private resistance to finally reach the throne would simply accept an administrative defeat in a matter of 9 hours. Let us look closely at the timeline of that departure. At exactly 6:12 in the evening, Queen Camilla's motorcade was scheduled to be heading west. However, verified tracking information indicates that the black Bentley did not merge onto the M4 highway toward the quiet, isolated retreat of Ray Mill House. Instead, the convoy made a sudden, unannounced detour back into the heart of the city. The vehicle navigated through the evening traffic and pulled over, idling for exactly 12 minutes outside a highly specific, very discreet address, number 44 Berkeley Square, in Mayfair. This location is entirely disconnected from the royal ecosystem. It is not a secondary palace, a diplomatic outpost, or charity foundation. According to corporate registry records, this unassuming building serves as the central headquarters for one of the most aggressive high-profile civil law firms in the United Kingdom. This specific firm does not handle constitutional law or royal trusts. Their globally recognized specialty is high net worth divorce, complex asset division, and the drafting of strict agreements to keep things secret. Eyewitness accounts from the square noted that during those crucial 12 minutes, a remaining loyal aide stepped out of the idling Bentley carrying a single unmarked black leather briefcase. That briefcase was handed directly to a legal representative waiting just inside the heavy oak doors of the firm. The administrative sweep conducted earlier today may have successfully locked down the Windsor Jewel Vault and permanently secured the Princess of Wales' authority over the royal heritage. But by isolating Queen Camilla so abruptly has the palace inadvertently triggered a completely different, far less controllable crisis. When a figure of this magnitude is entirely frozen out of the internal palace machinery, they are often forced to seek leverage in the only arena the monarchy cannot dictate behind closed doors: the civil court system. After 30 years inside the inner circle, Queen Camilla possesses an unparalleled understanding of the institution's private operations. Is this unexpected stop in Mayfair the first step in preparing a massive legal filing, a move that could challenge her marital framework and, by extension, threaten to legally expose the closely guarded, highly sensitive financial architecture of the entire royal household? When internal doors are locked, alternative and often unpredictable routes are forced open. The question now is not whether the palace successfully contained Queen Camilla's operational power today. The question is whether containing her so completely and so publicly pushed her toward the one arena where the palace has no control at all. Royal Daily Report, your trusted source for palace truth, breaking royal news, and exclusive family updates.